It's such a pleasure to host you here, to have you here, Jair. I've been reading about you in the past days, and I was amazed to hear about some of your experiences with education in EFL teaching, ESL teaching, and it connects a lot with us, as you already know, in terms of teaching the whole student in 21st century skills integrated in class, and all that you do with English language teaching, because that's one of the things that we try to teach our community, to educate our community about how much we can do while they are learning language. It's not only about learning the language, but everything that they can learn with that, everything that they can do with the language. So thank you very much for coming here to share your experiences and to set the tone of our training, and also to, how can I say, to properly introduce our speaker today. I'm going to read his bio just so that we can get an idea of everything that he has done. We're just talking about it, that it's not about the title, but it's about the history. It's about what we do, what we care about. So I'd like to read that. And before I read, just wanted to let you all know that many of our colleagues, our teachers are not here today because they are in class and in other activities, academic activities. So that's one of the reasons why we are recording it. Hi, people that are watching it in the future. Okay, so Jerry Felix is a National Geographic Learning Senior ELT academic consultant for Latin America. He has a BA in TEFL from Universidad, please correct me if I'm wrong, Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa in Mexico, okay, and a postgraduate degree on teachers development from the College of St. Mark and St. John, Plymouth, UK. Jerry has been involved in language teaching and teacher training for over 23 years and has conducted workshops on various topics such as lesson learning, lesson planning, discourse analysis for language teachers, action research, educational technologies, and 21st century skills, among others. Jerry also holds a diploma in teaching English for specific purposes and the e-tutoring certificate from the British Council. He is based in Mexico, and he was telling me that he's very glad that he's now back visiting different places in Latin America. It's really new after the pandemic, so we are very honored to have you here in Brazil and
Honors
in Recife, ABA. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And good morning, everyone. As you heard before, my name's Jair, but that's sadly my only connection to the Portuguese language. Whenever people hear my name, they assume that I'm Brazilian. I'm not, sadly. I'm a proud Mexican, but I was named after a very popular soccer player from the 70s when I was born. And my dad was madly in love with the guy, and so he decided to name me after him.
Was it a goalkeeper?
I think his name's Jairzinho,
Oh,
right? So it's not, and I'm sure it's not a goalkeeper. It's more like what is it? The forward player or something, right? There you go. So, anyways, so don't get misled by my name, and let's try to focus on English, because otherwise, no. Over the years, I've come to Brazil many times. In fact, I've been here in your premises before, giving some training, perhaps 6-7 years ago. I'm positive because it was yesterday or the day before yesterday that I got a memory from Facebook with myself standing in front of your premises with a selfie. So I know I've been here before, and it's as you heard, it's fantastic having the opportunity to reconnect with teachers in person. For the last 3 years, I've done a lot of teacher training and academic research virtually. I love it, but let's be honest, it's never the same. And there is something that's missed in interaction when you have to communicate with people through a screen, which is, again, perhaps the way for the future. But in present times, let's take advantage of the possibility of reconnecting and getting in touch with each other in person, which is fantastic. And the topic that I'm about to have a conversation with you about is teaching the whole student. We're not going to be talking about practical tips for, enhancing grammar or making the class more communicative when it comes to language skills and systems, because I think you're very well versed on that aspect. And I've developed a special interest in this topic, which is far more holistic, if you may, and either philosophical perhaps, but very practical in some other matters, considering students more of a whole, a human being, rather than the passive recipients of language and the active developers of sounds and lexicon. And it probably started during the pandemic, while I was, and I think we all did this at some point in the lockdown, I was going through old photos. I had nothing else to do, and so I decided to get those old photo albums out from the prehistory when we didn't have Facebook or Instagram, and we actually needed to print photos out. And so I came across these two images. This is me when I was about to turn 18. I was 17-ish, and I was just being offered my first gig as a language teacher. I had no clue on how to teach, but I knew English, because I was born in Mexico, but my parents migrated to Northern California when I was only 4. And so I spent most of my academic life in the US. And so by the time we came back to Mexico, I was fully bilingual. I had no idea whatsoever on how to teach the language, but it might be the story of our lives. We were offered a teaching position because we were good at the subject without any sort of pedagogical training beforehand. And this is the very first school I ever taught English at. I was again 17. And so that got me thinking. I became a teacher by an accident, but it was pretty much after the first lesson I ever taught that I went back home and I told my parents, because I was still living with my parents at the time. I was about to finish high school at the time, and I was trying to make up my mind on what my professional career would be about and where should I go to college and stuff. And so after my very first lesson taught, I went back home and I told my parents, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a teacher. I felt, madly in love with whatever happened in the classroom that day. And I can vividly remember the faces of the children I taught on that very first lesson. That's how crazy I got on the topic and the possibilities of teaching. So I guess the main reason why I decided to pursue a career as a language teacher was because I fell madly in love with the magic that happens in a classroom when you teach students, no matter the age, right? And so that got me thinking. When I first saw these images and I went back to that original feeling that I experienced when I started teaching, that got me thinking, when was it in the road that I somehow forgot that original feeling that I experienced when I started teaching? And so I have a similar question for you today. And for this, I want you to look for an elbow partner. I want you to look for someone that you can share your ideas with. She's leaving you, I know. No, she's not. She's back.
Just acting.
Yeah. So, and I want you to think for a second and then turn to the person next to you and try to tell a story on why is it that you decided to become a teacher in the first place. No matter how practical, no matter how crazy, the reasons are I'm very interested in hearing it from you. Why is it that you decided to become a teacher? What brought you here in the first place? Can you do that for me? Lovely. Off you go.
I just happened to have the same experience.
You were offered. There you go.
Actually, after the first time in the class, I just fell in love with it.
Right.
I was just doing it, for passing time, and that specific one, I was still figuring out what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And then entering the class, oh my gosh, that's it.
Right. Yeah. Very good. So, what are some of the reasons why you decided to become language teachers? I heard a few here, very interesting. So, any other reasons? Who would like to share in a quick way the story? Why did you become teachers in the first place?
I was a dentist.
Oh, okay. Okay. I can totally see the relation.
But I was very unhappy with my profession, and there wasn't any specific reason. I was just unhappy.
Right.
Being in that office closed, and I decided to study English again, just as a hobby. But when I went back to school, to the English school, I was like high advanced level, and my teacher at that time was a dentist too.
Interesting.
And she was like giving classes at night, and she was my inspiration. That's what I want to do. I want to have fun just like
Very good.
she does it. So
Very nice. So you got inspired by a colleague in many senses. So she was not a teacher colleague, also a dentist colleague. I've heard, people shifting from other occupations into teaching very often, but I think this is the first time I hear of a dentist getting into teaching. So,
all types of careers, yeah.
right.
I've been assistant analyst.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Interesting. Very nice. Very nice.
If you ask around,
The school I taught before, there were 3 dentists.
It might be a Brazilian thing, perhaps. Interesting. Very good. Yeah. Very interesting. Any other reasons? So that was pretty much mine was by mere accident, if you may. Her reason, it's more of an inspiration thing. He was telling us his mom is a kindergarten teacher, but for some reason she didn't want for him to get into the crazy world of teaching, but it was his true calling. So, right? So again, typically it's I followed my parents' steps into teaching. Yours is the opposite, right? Right, pretty much.
In my case, it's funny because my teachers used to tell me that I should be a teacher.
Oh,
And I was like, no,
that's not my thing.
no, you guys work way too hard. Like,
Right.
So I always thought of English as a hobby.
Right.
It's just something I like,
Uh-huh.
And then I didn't think of following like that path professionally at first. I wanted to study law. I wanted to study journalism. I studied business for a while.
Right.
But then when I realized I didn't like business at all, business college, I said, okay, I have to work for the rest of my life, so I should do something I like. And I've always taught, but I didn't really know I was teaching, my dolls, my sisters.
Right. Yeah.
So then I decided to actually study, languages.
Right.
Yeah, I usually say that teachers, they don't. It's not what they do,
Right.
it's what they are.
What you transmit, right? Pretty much.
You could not not be a teacher.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's in every fiber of yourself. Absolutely. So I've asked this same question over the past 3 years to many teachers, both virtually and in person. And I've got a number of reasons that span from very practical reasons to more idealistic reasons, if you may, including, for example, in the practical aspect. I've got teachers that have been very honest, and they've told me one of the main reasons why I decided to become a teacher is because of the holidays. There's no other profession with such long holidays but teaching. So that's the reason why I'm here. And I'm like, good for you. Kudos. And then there's the pension, which is a very practical reason as well. Teachers that have told me, I decided to work particularly for public systems because I want to I want to secure my adulthood, if you may, with a pension, or job security in itself, right? So these are pretty practical reasons, which are extremely valid as well. But on the other hand, a lot of teachers, by far many more than the practical ones, have told me things that are more idealistic, if you may. They've said, I became a teacher because I wanted to work with young people. I've always been very good dealing with young people or younger people, not in specific just kids, but younger people. Or I wanted to contribute to society. I've always enjoyed the thought of, doing something on behalf of others, and I thought that education might be a good way to do it. Or I love English. I've always been madly in love with the language, and I developed the language highly, and so I want to share that with others. But by far, the most typical and consistent reason I've got with, different language, if you may, using different vocabulary, but we can encompass the most popular reason into this. I wanted to make a difference to children's lives. The main reason why I became a teacher in the first place is because I've always felt that need to significantly, positively impact other people's lives. And it got my attention also that no matter the age level you're teaching, because I've got this same answer from college level professors, and they seem to think of their students as their kids. Even if they're teaching very grown-up students, they say, my kids, my students, my children, right? And I'm like, aren't they like postgraduate students?
Aren't just seniors.
Well,
And they are my children.
there you go. Thank you. Exactly. So it's not a matter of age. It's that sort of relation that you establish with your students in which you positively impact their lives, right? And to my surprise, this is again out of my own research, but I've been searching for a more formal database, and I came across this really interesting research by the Utah Education Policy Center in the States. They interviewed thousands of teachers within the state, and the simple question was, why is it that you're a teacher? That was the original question of the research. 93% of the teachers answered, because I wanted to make a difference to pupils' lives. Because I thought I'd be good at it. Because I have an interest in teaching. I have an interest in whatever the subject it is I'm teaching, in our case, English. Because I wanted to make a difference to society, and because I had a desire to work with children or young people, which is pretty much in line with the answers I've collected in my own research. And I thought that was pretty interesting, right? So overall, at least at the beginning of our professional path, we have a very strong idealistic intention of impacting our students' lives for the better. So there we were, first day of school, first time we're teaching, getting into a class with a very solid, well-rounded lesson plan, ready to make a difference to your students' lives. And so in the process, I've also asked teachers, what are the things that you've encountered in your career that have probably go against your original purpose of positively impacting your students' lives? What are the things you encounter in your everyday practice in teaching that perhaps are a bit against your original purpose of making a difference to your students' lives? And I've got quite interesting answers on this. And let's see if you think you can identify with any of them. Some teachers, well, a lot of teachers actually, the majority of teachers I've interviewed have told me that one thing that goes a bit against that original idea is their students' expectations. It's like they're not that keen on being positively impacted. They're not intrinsically motivated to be in my class. If I'm teaching at a regular school, they just see English as another compulsory subject they have to take rather than as, a tool for communication or accessing other cultures and acquiring more knowledge. And if they're teaching at a language school, many times they've said they're being forced to be here. Their parents send them, or their jobs, if you're teaching adults, they had to come here because that would secure employment, anything like that, right? But it's not that they are open to being positively impacted at first, if you know what I mean. So their expectations to your class, it's pretty much for it to be over. They're here, but they're here just waiting for the class to be over and move on, right? So that's sometimes, thank you, what goes against your original intention of positively impacting your students' lives. If you're teaching children, you also have to deal with your students' parents' expectations. It's like, yeah, I love the fact that you have, UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goals as part of your curriculum. I was madly thrilled looking at that poster outside. I even snapped a photo of it because that is pretty much our main message at National Geographic Learning. So we're partners in crime. But anyways, we have that very, very strong high spirit on positively impacting our students' lives. And maybe parents are thinking, yeah, that's cool, but no, I want you to teach my kid how to order a pair of jeans because I'm taking them to Orlando on a trip next month. So,
Basically words. I just want them to get a 10 in text.
right, there you go. Exactly, right? So maybe sometimes your students' parents' expectations aren't aligned with your original idea of positively impacting your students' lives. Or if you're teaching adults, it might be that your students' future employers' expectations have little to do, again, with the positive thought, the positive intention you had on impacting their lives for the better, right? It's like maybe all they need is for you to teach them ESP lexicon or the tools for translating manuals from English to Portuguese or vice versa, and things like that. So maybe their expectations have little to do with your original intention of positively impacting your students' lives. Schools' expectations, I'm assuming because of the evidence that that's not the case here, but it might be the case in many other schools in which that idea of sustainable development goals and multiculturalism and teaching students as a whole, it's not important for the school's administration, right? Or if you were teaching at a public institution, the government's expectations, the compulsory syllabus that you have to cover that perhaps has little to do with your original intention. But then again, by far, the answer that I've got from teacher most commonly when it comes to what is blocking that positive impact that you wanted to have on your students is the lockdown. They've said, on top of all this, I was all of a sudden in the middle of a pandemic. It was the lockdown. All of my beautiful lesson plans needed to be changed overnight in order to be, used and presented virtually. I lost my students' interest and engagement. I was already there, having an impact in their lives, but all of a sudden, the pandemic hit, and we had to start all over again, right? So it was even traumatic for a lot of teachers that I've interviewed. And that again got me thinking, it's been so dense and somehow traumatic for us, imagine how it's been for your students, right? Imagine how difficult it's been for your students to live through a lockdown, to live through a pandemic. And on top of that, having to keep on learning grammatical structures, memorizing lexical sets, developing functions and competences in a foreign language, without even having the certainty of what's ahead of us in the future. Am I gonna be ever able to use this language that I'm learning in real life? Nobody knows. That was the thought of many students a year or 2 years ago with the uncertainty of the pandemic. And that has taken its toll on how our students process information and approach the learning process. I was frankly scared by an article that I read only last week. And I think I have, I'm not using my computer, but anyways, I think I have the data for that. It's a very recently launched research by the Ministry of the Department of Education in, I think it's the state of Texas in the US, that states that 1 out of 3 teens in the US are currently experiencing some sort of depression or suicidal thoughts. 1 out of 3. The number is horrible. 1 out of 3 teens after the pandemic are somehow experiencing depressive and even suicidal thoughts.
I don't think it's different.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you that question. Do you see any significant difference in your local situation?
Before lockdown, we already had an increase in the number of anxiety and depressions
Right.
between teams. Very high increase, changes in the educational system, and
Right.
a lot of pressure from society. And after lockdown, obviously, this number got
Right.
worse.
I was also reading, but I can't quite remember numbers, statistics on this one, but they were talking about the massive increase on digestive issues on younger kids, elementary school kids, that go through a crisis of colitis and gastritis, and it's all because of stress. Isn't that amazing? It's not because of their diet, it's because of stress and the amount of pressure they have and that they cannot cope with. So that again got me thinking, it might be a good time to reconnect with our original intention of positively impacting our students' lives. It might be a good time that we reconsider the possibility of making a difference to our students' lives. Because when we experience all this and when we see all this real stuff happening in our class, we tend to tackle this down or to cater for these needs. And then we all of a sudden forget about our original intention. And all we care about is finishing with the program or making sure that our students learn how to conjugate verbs in irregular past, or if they've memorized lexical sets correctly. And we forget about that original intention we had on positively impacting their lives for the better, right? So on that, I started this group activity, this collaborative effort with a few colleagues at National Geographic Learning, and we developed this idea of 3 ways to encourage positivity, develop soft skills, and deal with difficult situations when instructing students in English. What is it that we, language teachers, could do in order to promote positive thoughts as part of our English language lessons? What is it that we language teachers can do in order to develop soft skills for our students' well-being? Because a lot has been said on the need for soft skills like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, etc. Among students. But what are the ones that would promote well-being among our students? What are the ones that will reduce their stress levels, their anxiety levels, so that they are more in disposition, if you may, to learn, to acquire new language? And then, what is it that we could do as language teachers to show our students effective ways for dealing with difficult situations? And we designed a few activities that I'm about to share with you a lot of them could be applied in all different kinds of groups, no matter the ages. You'll realize how maybe some of the activities are exemplified with children or teen characteristics, but when you think of it and you just adjust a couple of things in within the activity, they could be put into practice with all levels, no matter the age and no matter the proficiency language level of your students. And so let's begin with 3 ways to encourage positivity. Three different kinds of activities that we could put into practice in order to promote the development not only of language, but also positive thoughts among our students, okay? And the first one is simply, directly asking your students, what is it that makes you feel positive? And it might sound logical, but then again,
I'm laughing a little bit because we've been doing this, exactly this, the whole way.
fantastic, lovely, I love it. Asking your students very much straightforward, what is it that makes you happy? What puts a smile on your face? Simple as that. Rabbits, absolutely. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that interesting? Or taking a bath. For whatever reason, they seem to enjoy taking a shower, taking a bath. Or connecting with friends, which by far was the most popular one. So what I did with my own students is I collected their answers and I created a word cloud like this. And when I was teaching them virtually, I used this as the background. My Zoom background was this word cloud. And now that they're back in person in regular classrooms, I'm not teaching them anymore because I'm traveling now. But what I've asked my sub-teacher to do is to print this out and create a poster. And so every time they get into the classroom, they see what are the things that put a smile on their face. And just by the fact of looking at it, they develop a positive thought, right? Just by looking at it. But it's not just a matter of looking at it or collecting answers. It's making sure that we put this into practice in our lesson plan for teaching purposes. So for example, they said that connecting with friends is something they like to do and something that makes them feel positive. So I make sure that at some point during my week lesson plan, I have activities that would allow for them to stay connected, that would allow for them to get in touch with a significant person in their lives, including activities like, for example, this one here. Contacting 3 friends or 3 family members, for that matter, important, significant people in their lives, and ask them to, and there's a number of possibilities depending on what's the topic, what's the language that you're teaching in your class, right? So for example, it might be contact 3 friends or family members and ask them to tell you an interesting fact about themselves. Or contact 3 friends or family members and ask them to think of 3 adjectives to describe you. And to be honest, this second activity, I stole it, if you may, from my own kid's teacher. My kid, he's a 3rd grader, and when he went back to school, in person that is, one day I went to pick him up at school, and I could tell that something significant had happened at school just by the way he was walking down the aisle, and he was like, glowing, if you may. He had a huge smile on his face, and he had a paper on his hands. As he got in the car, I asked him, "How was your day?" And he said, "It was amazing." "Tell me about it," I said. And he said, "Well, my teacher today asked us to getting an activity in which we would walk around the classroom and we would write something positive to describe each of our classmates. So I would go to my friend's table and I would write something, a single word, on her piece of paper describing her positively, right? You have no idea on the words that I got on my paper, he said. And I said, can you read them out for me as I was driving? It was the most, silly, crazy adjectives you could possibly thought of that span from you're funny, you're crazy. He is crazy, by the way, and he's very funny as well. You're a good singer. You're a good sports player. What was the other one? You tell the best jokes was another one. You're smart. You're a good friend, etc., etc. And when as he was reading the list, and I was very impressed with the effect that such words were having on him, he just very, honestly told me, I had no idea I was this cool. That's what he told me. I had no idea I was this cool. Do you know where that paper is right now?
On the wall.
Not on a wall. On the fridge. Right? So every time he walks by the fridge, he takes a look at that paper and he goes, huh. So he feels great with himself. And I'm sure that teacher had no clue. Well, maybe she did. But the outreach of such activity is immense because it's giving her students certainty, secureness, if you know what I mean. And so I thought of it as part of this list. Ask your students to think of 3 adjectives to describe each other, or if you don't want to do it in class, ask them to contact 3 friends or 3 family members and work on a list of adjectives that would describe them. Or tell them about the time they felt scared or excited or proud, or what their last meal would be. That's more for like adult level students or high English level students. Describe a friend of theirs whom you have never met, etc., etc., etc. But the thing is, you're giving them solid reasons for connecting with people that are important to them. And that is of extreme importance, particularly in this post-pandemic stage that we're in which for some reason, it's been very, very clear now that somewhere in the lockdown process, a lot of us forgot how to connect with friends in a real setting. We're really good at chatting and texting and WhatsApping and having Facebook Live calls. But whenever we sit around the table and we have to carry a regular person-to-person conversation, it gets tricky now. And walk through a restaurant, and what is it that you will see? You would see a lot of heads down, 5 people around the table, each of them putting their heads down, texting. And my guess is at some point they're texting each other. But it is difficult to establish a conversation. Imagine how difficult it might be for your students to establish a conversation in a foreign language, right? So activities like this would allow for them to reconnect with that process. So my point here? Another is challenging your students to get outside, even if they're just sticking their head out of the window. And this is of a personal level importance for me. I thought of it after my kids, again, went back to school. My oldest daughter is almost 15 now. And I couldn't help noticing how the first 2 or 3 months that she started going back to school on daily basis, the moment she came back from school, she would get rid of her uniform, wear her pajamas, and stay like that for the rest of the day. And I'm like, it's 3 p.m. Why on earth are you wearing your pajamas? And she's like, I'm not going out. I have nothing else to do. Why not? And I'm like, there's a life out there. And it's like, well, yeah, but I don't feel like the need to go out. And what about meeting your friends? Oh, I'm meeting my friends. We're having we're having a Facebook thing together in a minute. And it's like, gosh, is this what the future is going to look like for my kids? I don't want that sort of future for my kids, at least not now. So let's just challenge them to go outside, to enjoy nature, to get in touch with what the environment offers. And if it's for linguistic reasons, even better, because we're, doing a dual objective, if you may, through a single activity. So I would challenge students to do things like this. I would say, for homework, I want you to go outside, and if I'm teaching very young kids, for example, I want you to go outside and take a picture for every color in the rainbow. Take a picture for every color in the rainbow, and then bring your photos back. And we're going to have a showcase, and we're going to challenge your partners to name the colors by looking at your pictures. So instead of doing it from the page of a book, even if you're using National Geographic learning books that are fantastic and amazing, every now and then, bringing the world to the classroom in a real manner with photos that your own students took is far more significant, right? Or go out, take a picture for every letter of the alphabet, and then have a guessing game in school, guessing the words just by looking at the photo, right? Or if you're teaching adult level students, for example, give your students a colloquial phrase in English. Two heads are better than one, or every cloud has silver lining, or whatever the colloquial phrase you can possibly think of, and challenge them to take a picture that represents that colloquial phrase, and then bring it back to school and challenge the class to guess the phrase just by looking at the photo, for example. Again, you're bringing the world into the classroom in a very practical way. And in that same way, you're challenging your students to get off their pajamas, like my daughter, and go outside and get in touch with what the environment has to offer, right? Good. Another set of activities is, well, more than a set of activities. This one has to do with going with the flow, challenging your students to create something, which is the premises of a task-based learning or project-based learning, right? And I'm very much concerned about this because now that we're back into, in-person practice, a lot of students claim or they state that they've been asked to do a lot and that they wish they had nothing to do for a day or two. When in reality, according to Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, a Polish psychologist, people are actually happier when they're busy, as long as they're doing something that is challenging. So it's not just a matter of throwing a lot of activities to our students, but rather doing something that is challenging enough. So he invented the term flow for the pleasant experience of having enough interesting things to do that you don't notice time passing. What's going on?
We have a course named Flow because of that.
No.
Yes.
We're partners in crime. Isn't that amazing? Wow. So doing nothing, on the other hand, make us feel bored, guilty, and depressed. So let's give our students practical, challenging enough activities to perform. And through that, they're not only developing their language further, you're also promoting positiveness. You're also promoting the possibility of them getting so much immersed in the activity that no negative thoughts would affect the process. See my point here? Fantastic. And I'm thrilled that you guys are pretty much in the same. That's fantastic. What sort of challenges? Challenges that are out of the ordinary. For example, every now and then, how about asking your students to write a story? If you're promoting free writing, for example, if you're promoting critical writing, write a story which includes the words piano, tree, and banana, which at the surface have nothing to do with each other. So you're triggering creativity and engagement through this practical challenge. Or find a healthy recipe in English which uses a cabbage, a pepper, and some cheese. And trust me, there are recipes online that include those ingredients. Now, the challenge is change some of the ingredients and make your own version. Write your recipe and take a photo explaining why it's healthy. Let's say you're teaching a unit on healthy eating habits. And so this would be your project, your go with the flow sort of activity, if you know what I mean. Or if you're teaching younger kids, for example, you could say, draw a picture of something you love. It could be a person you love, a pet you love, a possession, a view, etc. And then write a few short sentences to say why you love it. But it's taking your students out of the ordinary, out of the traditional fill-in-the-blank activities from the page of a book. Even if the book's a National Geographic learning book, there's always room for getting students in the flow with activities that would challenge them further to use creativity, innovation, critical thinking, not only for linguistic purposes, as we see, but also for those more well-being purposes, having positive thoughts, forget about negative thoughts whenever possible, right? Beautiful. Questions so far? Yes.
I was thinking about, I've seen that the right three adjectives to describe. Would you be more specific in guiding the students to write positive adjectives, or would you accept any adjectives? Because I saw, I saw this happen before. As in, okay, write three adjectives to describe me, but make it like block capital letters so that I won't recognize when I read it. And then you put them in a bag, take it home.
Right.
And then you read it without really associating, the right to...
I see your point.
I think realistically.
Right. It all depends on the age level. If you're doing this with children, and particularly teenagers, I wouldn't do this in a less controlled sort of setting. This wouldn't be an activity that would include take your papers home and then realize what is it that they've written about you on your own. This has to be a very controlled activity within the class setting with very, very well-established rules, like you're only allowed to write positive comments, for example, because that's the main intention of the activity. If they're thinking about writing you're selfish and obnoxious, then yeah, that's gonna backfire at the activity itself. So yeah, I would do it with very precise instructions. I would even, if it's necessary, I would present my students with a long list of positive adjectives that they could use so that they could choose from the list. Because remember, we're not simply aiming at a linguistic objective, which would be the practice of adjectives or descriptors, but rather a more well-being, holistic objective of making your students feel positive. So it has to be, at least at the beginning, and particularly with children and teens, a very controlled activity.
So the aim is to sort of uplift their spirit.
Right, exactly. That's the aim.
It's not to really be an X-ray of what.
Right.
Because you know that thing that people say, like some people love you for what you are, some people hate you for what you
Right, yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, think of it as this might be the only time in which some of your students are going to get a positive remark about themselves. So let's take that opportunity and make the best out of it. Absolutely. Yeah, very good. Very nice. By all means. So that's 3 ways for triggering positive thoughts on your students. The second aspect that I want to share with you is 3 ways for developing soft skills on your students, right? And again, a lot has been said and done about soft skills, so I want to concentrate on the ones that would particularly trigger this aspect of positiveness and well-being among your students. And the first one is the possibility of rediscovering the benefits of collaborative efforts, of teamwork. I don't know if that's your case, but a lot of teachers have told me, particularly after the pandemic, they've said, you know what, I'm not a big fan of group work anymore. Because what I've noticed is that my students struggle a lot, even to organize the work within their teams. They don't seem to know how to begin working together. They don't seem to know how to effectively cooperate and collaborate anymore. Or they've told me they take that opportunity to misbehave badly. They don't speak in English at all whenever they're together. They always tend to speak in their native language, and they start gossiping and playing around, fooling around, and they don't finish the main aim of the practice. So I'm not a big fan of group work anymore. I'm just individual activities all the time. And that breaks my heart into pieces. Because at the end, the ultimate goal of language teaching is communication, collaboration, exchange of ideas. And individually, there's so much you can do in terms of intra-communication and intra-personal, practice, right? So you always need someone to share your thoughts and your ideas with, particularly if you're developing a language. So my guess is that perhaps what's needed is for students to understand, become aware on how to work successfully in teams before you set up the teamwork activity. Have you ever taken the time of teaching your students how is it that they should work in a team? And I've got to the point of making a poster out of this illustration that we created for one of our publications, and that you're more than welcome to use, by the way. How to work in a team. Rather than saying, okay, class, we're going to get in groups of 4. Here's your assignment. Work through it. You have 25 minutes. Rather than doing that, I'm going to take that first lesson, that first opportunity, to walk my students through what's needed of them in order to successfully work together. And I'm going to explain and I'm going to exemplify what it means to be reliable, what it means to do your share, becoming accountable of the work that you are supposed to perform as part of your teamwork effort. What is it that you could do, for example, if you finish early, if you finish faster than the rest of your group? How can you support team members? Why is it that you have to listen to others respectfully? Why is it that everyone has to have a chance to express their ideas, but the rest have to listen respectfully? Why is it that what really, really matters in a collaborative effort is respecting each other and respecting what each other has to contribute with to the team? Once they get a hold of this process, magic happens. Because they know that they have to be reliable and accountable, and that they have to listen, and that there will be opportunities for them to express their thoughts. What is it that they can do if they finish early, or if they're struggling, who they can ask for help to? Why is it that respecting other people is important? Once you presented them with a diagram like this and you walk them through the process, the rest is like a walk in the park. Because now they have no excuse. They have to work or else. See my point here? And then once you present them with that, you can give them whatever the projects you have in your book, or whatever the projects you want to implement in your class. But what really matters first is to make them aware on how to work in teams proficiently. Okay? Very nice. So that's what, when it comes to collaborative efforts, making students aware. The other aspect that I think it's of extreme importance is that of resilience. Telling our students it is okay to be wrong sometimes. What really matters is your attitude towards that error, towards that mistake. You're here because you're learning. And as a learner, you're entitled to give the wrong answer. You're entitled to make mistakes. It's not something that we're gonna, scorn you for. It's something that we're gonna welcome, because what really matters is your attitude towards the error, towards the mistake. If you make it a learning opportunity, magic will happen. Let's be resilient and let's face errors and mistakes and issues and problems with a positive attitude. Let's be more like Dory.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Heroes. When life gets down, you know what you gotta do? Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim. Dory, I love to swim. Dory, when you want to swim, you want to. See, I'm gonna get stuck now with that song now it's in my head. Sorry.
So it might be silly, but that's the magic recipe. Just keep swimming. You have a bad pronunciation, just keep speaking. It'll get better. You're struggling with your writing, just keep writing. It'll get better. You're struggling with your reading, just keep reading. See my point here? So presenting students with that possibility and telling them that it is okay to be wrong sometimes in your class makes the whole of difference to your students, because they've been told practically for their entire academic life that all what matters is having the right answer. That's what they've been trained for, giving the right answer or else. Where in reality, the learning process includes an amount of failure, because failure is instructional in the process. Make your students aware of that. And also show them how they can use resilience, that idea of just keep swimming in the face of problems, in the face of anxiety, in the face of worries. Just keep swimming. Make your students aware of the benefits of realizing, analyzing what the problem is, and thinking of plans for fixing them. Right? I've got to the point of doing activities like this that have little to do with linguistic efforts, that have more to do with a more holistic approach to education and teaching. But if I realize that my students are going through a process of massive misbehavior, there's something going on. If they're struggling to focus and pay attention to my class, something's going on. So I would say, close your books down, take a piece of paper out, and depending on how I wanted to work with it, I could ask them to work individually or in groups. And I could say, what is it that's keeping your mind busy? Are you experiencing some sort of a problem right now? I want you to write it down. It's an individual thing. It's an anonymous thing. You don't have to look on any other's problems. Let's focus on your own now. And it might be that the problem is, I have a new pimple that it's killing me. I don't like my acne, for example, if you're teaching teenagers. It might be, if you're teaching children, it might be that, I wanted to work with Jorge at the playground and he didn't want to play with me. See my point here? It might be the case in which you encounter more massive issues, and that's the time in which you seek for help. That's another thing. We're no superheroes. We're language teachers. So if you realize that there's a massive issue happening in your students' lives, then ask for help, right? Send that student to, any sort of a possible support they can get from whoever is at school with the right background to provide them with help, right? Like a psychologist or whatever the sort of help that they could possibly need. Because there's a limit to what we could do as language teachers as well. But the first step is making students aware of their own problem and then writing a list of small steps that they can take to deal with it. And think of small rewards for every step taken. And then, if you want to make it a more, group practice, you can ask them to share anonymously with the class. And in that way, realize that maybe a lot of them are sharing the same problem, and they could also exchange steps into solving that problem, right? But that again, the idea is making students aware of how resilient they can get to be. That there's always a solution to whatever the problem they're experiencing, and that perhaps the secret recipe is keep trying it, keep doing it, till you master it. Are you with me? Because I see your heads are going like this a lot. And I wonder if you're falling asleep, or if you're saying, or if it's a sounding yes. Very good. And then there's critical thinking. But critical thinking from the perspective of teaching our students how to ask the right questions. That's the foundation of critical thinking. A lot has been researched, a lot has been, published on the topic of critical thinking. But I think the most basic yet most applicable definition for critical thinking is the ability to ask the right questions and challenge the assumption. That's the essence of critical thinking. So for us language teachers, critical thinking should be a given, because the essence of critical thinking is WH words. Which, when, where, why, at what time, etc., etc. Those WH words are the basis, the foundation of critical thinking processes. Because at the end, what we're looking for is for our students to ask the right questions to challenge the assumption. And what's the assumption? Whatever thing that is evident, a news, even an image, a text, an audio, a video, in which they can actually get to answer questions like this, right? And what I've done in order to promote critical thinking further is to teach my students about fake news and use fake news in order to prove a point, if you know what I mean. So I would visit some of these sites that I have here. I would get some of the news presented here, and then I would challenge my students to answer these questions. And in that way, they go into a further analysis of the evidence. It's not the typical read and answer sort of questions from a textbook, but rather infer, read between the lines, go beyond the evidence in order to decide whether if that information is a fact or an oath, if it's of any benefit to your life or not, etc., etc. And even for younger kids, and by the way, I noticed that you're taking notes, which is fantastic. Note-taking is amazing for synapses, for example, so keep on writing notes. But I can give you a copy of the presentation as well. So if you want to get a copy of this so you can go through the slides in more detail, that's a given. So it's not only for more mature students, even for younger kids, you can trigger critical thinking up to a very high level by using, for example, the power of an image, which is the essence of National Geographic learning materials, for example. So let me ask you something, and imagine having this with your own kids' class. But let's see how it works with adult level students or people, teachers in this case. So let's take a look at the photo. It's a bright, vibrant photo, if you may. Where do you think this photo was taken? Somewhere in the Caribbean. Interesting. What makes you say that? The flamingo. So the evidence is the flamingo. So you're assuming, since there's a flamingo here, that this is a photo from a Caribbean country. Which country? Ah. Any ideas? Or a different opinion. It might be that it's not a Caribbean country. It might be somewhere else.
I think it's Kenya.
Kenya.
Yeah, I think so too.
Why Kenya?
Because there are flamingos in Africa.
Okay.
And
It's an English-speaking. Apparently, it's an English-speaking school.
Right. Okay. Very good. So you're analyzing the evidence. You're challenging the assumption by analyzing the evidence in detail. That's the essence of critical thinking, right? What animal is that? Again, you knew it. Maybe children would struggle a bit further. It's a flamingo. But the real question here is it a real flamingo or a fake flamingo? That was your first question? You're a critical thinker.
Is that a real animal?
There you go. That is the essence of critical thinking, right? And the more your students get into that, the less room for negative thoughts, because their minds get busy critically analyzing an evidence. You focus their effort, their engagement into something that it's practical, right? And that it's doable. And that in itself provides them with positive thoughts and wellness, right? So, real or fake? You think it's real? What makes you say that?
The way he's holding the bird.
The way he's holding the bird.
the other kid is looking at the bird, like at the kid as well.
This kid's looking at the bird. Yeah, if it was a fake bird, perhaps he would be carrying it like this, right? Rather than holding it, right?
Also, I think it's like a phrase from a book. So I don't think a book, a National Geographic book, would put a fake picture.
Well, you never know. You never know. But you're right. This is a photo. This is a photo that I took from one of her books. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But it could be in a statue or something.
I don't know, but it's life lesson. It's not like, don't believe what you're told.
It could be a school project. There you go. Maybe they build them themselves, right? So, this is Flamingo Bob, a real pink flamingo in Curacao. So you were right. It's in the Caribbean. It's in Curacao. Very good. And Bob is a rescued flamingo. He was rescued by a vet. So he was extremely lucky. A vet was visiting a beach in Curacao, and he saw Bob entangled in plastic debris. And he was about to die of starvation. So it's been days, maybe weeks, that he was struggling to get himself out of that plastic debris. So the vet took him to his office, he healed Bob, and he kept him. And now he visits schools all over Curacao, promoting the cleaning of beaches, forming groups with kids in order to do coastal cleanup, preventing for more animals to go through all the hassle that Bob had to go through, right? But then again, I mean, we could do a lot on this, and we could establish a discussion, a debate on the topic, etc., as a follow-up activity. But what we did, analyzing the photo, considering the possibilities, making inferences by challenging the assumption from the photo, that's the essence of critical thinking. And the more you get into that practice, the more you're promoting positiveness and a sense of well-being among your students. All right? Very good. How am I doing with time? So there's three more things that I wanted to share with you, but that are pretty much in line with what I've been telling you so far. I'm going to skip that part, but you're going to get a copy of the presentation anyway, so you can read through it. And I want you to think of this. Okay, so what we've discussed so far is that idea that we originally had at the beginning of positively impacting our students' lives. And nowadays, because of the after lockdown set of attitudes that we're experiencing and dealing with our students, it is more urgent than ever, right? So let's reconnect with our original intention of positively impacting our students' lives, and let's put some of these ideas into practice. Let's encourage positivity. Let's teach our students to develop soft skills. Let's give them opportunities to deal with difficult situations through the activities that we establish in class. This is the foundation of what is now social and emotional learning. The castle diagram that again is perhaps of equal importance to the language content that you have to teach in your class. Why is it so important? Why are we talking about teaching the whole student? Any ideas? Why are we spending our hour today discussing such topics instead of doing how to teach grammar communicatively, for example? Why teaching the whole student, do you think, is of importance right now?
Because education cannot be segmented anymore, because when we teach, I think that at this moment we have to teach kids and how to deal with challenges and how to overcome difficulties, especially
Right.
All the trauma and everything. So when we're dealing with a student, like we had last Friday here,
Oh.
we were outside, so it's much more than being in class. It's who I am in front of my colleagues.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what we have to think.
Lovely.
When we make our lesson.
Lovely.
If we don't have functional, happy human beings, what is the point of anything else?
Exactly. When you live well, you study well. Or if you put it on the other way around, if you promote that sense of well-being and even positiveness, even happiness in your class, chances are your students are going to study harder. They're going to learn better. Because when students live well, they study well. And there's a lot of evidence, scientific evidence, that says that emotionally stable, happy, positive students learn better, right? They learn better because if you're familiar with, let's say, Krashen's theory of affective filters, the more stressed, the more anxious they are, the bigger and stronger the affective filters get. So when we put this sort of activities into practice, we are diminishing affective filters, and we're promoting this emotionally stable, happy feeling among our students. And when we prepare students for life, we prepare them for success, both inside, but perhaps more importantly, outside of the classroom. So let's get back to our original idea of positively impacting our students' lives for the better. Because let's not forget that we can make a difference to our students' lives. Let's take that opportunity and make the best out of it. All right? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. As I mentioned before, if you want to get a copy of this presentation, I can leave it on your computer if you wanted to. If you want to get your own copy, drop me a line and I'll send you the link for you to download it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, and I certainly hope to be back here soon. All right? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.